Curtis Marquez pulled his Ford pickup into the driveway just as the November sun was setting over the Indianapolis suburbs. The house looked dark, which was odd for Thanksgiving Eve. His muscles ached from the 12-hour drive from Houston, where he'd been overseeing the final phase of the commercial development project he'd been managing for 18 months. He'd pushed through the fatigue to make it home in time, imagining his son Brandon's face when he walked through the door. That's when he saw it. His 12-year-old son curled up in the back seat of the family's old Camry, parked in the driveway. Curtis's stomach dropped. He rushed over and tapped on the window. Brandon jerked awake, his brown hair sticking up at odd angles, his face creasing into a confused smile when he recognized his father. "Dad, you're home!" Brandon scrambled out of the car, wrapping his thin arms around Curtis's waist. The boy was wearing the same clothes from 3 days ago, Curtis noticed, and there was a faint smell that suggested he hadn't showered recently. "What are you doing sleeping in the car, kiddo? Where's everyone?" Curtis's voice was calm, but his jaw tightened. His wife Miranda had assured him over text just yesterday that everything was fine at home, that they'd have a big dinner ready when he arrived. Brandon's smile faltered. "Mom said, well, there's a note on the door. I wasn't allowed inside." The boy's voice cracked slightly, but then he straightened his shoulders, trying to look brave. "It's okay, though. I've been fine. Mrs. Patterson next door brought me sandwiches yesterday and today." Curtis felt rage building in his chest, hot and dangerous. He guided Brandon toward the front door, where a cream-colored envelope was taped to the wood. He ripped it down, his hands shaking as he read the looping handwriting he recognized as his mother-in-law's. "Curtis, we've taken a family trip to Italy for Thanksgiving. Brandon is not welcome. We have our reasons. Deal with your mistake on your own. The house is locked. We'll discuss things when we return. Josephine." "My mistake." Curtis read it again, the words blurring. Brandon wasn't anyone's mistake. He was the best thing that had ever happened to Curtis. A son from his previous relationship. Brandon had come into Curtis's full custody 5 years ago when his mother signed away her rights. Miranda had seemed accepting at first, even warm toward the boy. "Dad, don't be mad." Brandon tugged at his father's jacket. "I'm okay, really. And look," he pulled a crumpled manila envelope from inside his coat. "Grandma Josephine left her bag on the counter before they all left. I snuck in through my window to get my jacket because it was getting cold. The bag fell over and this slid out. I looked inside because I wanted to know why they hate me." Curtis took the envelope, his contractor's hands rough against the paper. Inside were documents, photocopies of legal papers, printed emails, bank statements, and handwritten notes. As he read through them under the porch light, his expression shifted from confusion to disgust to something cold and calculating. "Brandon, get your things. We're going to a hotel tonight. Are you mad at me for looking?" Curtis knelt down, gripping his son's shoulders. "I'm not mad at you. I'm proud of you. You might have just saved both of us." An hour later, they were checked into a Hampton Inn with a view of the highway. Brandon was showering while Curtis spread the documents across the queen bed, organizing them chronologically. His phone buzzed, a message from Miranda's brother, Garrett Moss. "Heard you made it back. Guess you found her note. Don't bother calling. This needed to happen." Curtis didn't respond. Instead, he photographed every document, uploading them to a secure cloud account. Then he started making calls. The first was to Neil Steele, his attorney and former college roommate. Neil answered on the second ring. "Curtis? Isn't it Thanksgiving tomorrow? What's wrong? I need you at the hotel in an hour. Bring whatever recording equipment you have." "And Neil, this is going to be the strangest case you've ever worked." The second call was to Marcus Lawrence, a private investigator Curtis had worked with during a construction dispute 2 years back. "Marcus, I need deep background checks. Financial records, if you can get them legally. I'll send you the names and details in 10 minutes. The third call was to his bank. He needed to protect his accounts. By the time Brandon emerged from the bathroom in clean clothes Curtis had grabbed from the house, Neil was knocking on the door. The attorney's eyes widened as Curtis spread the documents across the desk and began explaining what he'd found. Neil Steele had prosecuted white-collar criminals for 6 years before moving into private practice, and he thought he'd seen every kind of family betrayal. But as Curtis walked him through the documents piece by piece, His expression darkened with each revelation. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," Neil said, adjusting his glasses. "Your wife and her family were planning to have you declared mentally incompetent?" Curtis nodded, his finger tapping on a letter from a psychiatrist named Dr. Roland Lambert. This doctor was paid $15,000 by my mother-in-law Josephine to write a preliminary evaluation suggesting I was experiencing a breakdown. Look at the date, 2 weeks ago. I've never met this man. That's fraud. Medical fraud. Neil flipped through more pages. And these emails between Miranda and her mother. They're discussing how to get you committed to a psychiatric facility. After they drain my accounts, Curtis pulled out bank statements. "See these transfers? Miranda's been slowly moving money from our joint account to one in her name only. 20,000 here, 30,000 there. Small enough not to trigger alerts, spread out over 8 months." Brandon sat on the bed, hugging his knees, listening quietly. Curtis had told him he could watch TV or play on his tablet, but the boy insisted on staying. "I want to know what they did," he'd said firmly. Curtis continued, "But here's the part that tells you what kind of people they are." He handed Neil a printed email chain. "This is from Miranda to her mother, dated 6 weeks ago." Neil read aloud, his voice incredulous. "Mother, Brandon is becoming a problem. He asks too many questions, and Curtis is too attached to him. If we proceed with the commitment plan, we need to establish that Curtis's judgment is impaired, especially regarding the boy. We could suggest his obsession with Brandon shows delusional thinking." Neil looked up. "They were going to use your love for your son as evidence of insanity?" "Keep reading." Neil's face flushed with anger as he continued. "Once Curtis is in care, we can make decisions about Brandon's placement. Douglas found a military boarding school in Montana that takes difficult children year-round. It's expensive, but necessary. Brandon needs to understand there are consequences for not being one of us. They were going to lock me away and send Brandon to basically a prison for kids," Curtis said flatly. "And they'd have control of my assets to do it. I'm worth about $2.3 million between the house, my business, investments, and life insurance policies Miranda persuaded me to increase last year." Neil set the papers down carefully. "Curtis, this is criminal conspiracy. This is attempted fraud, possibly attempted kidnapping regarding Brandon. Why would they think they could get away with this?" Curtis leaned back against the dresser, his arms crossed. "Because they're the Moss family, and in their minds, they're untouchable." He paused, organizing his thoughts. "I need to tell you about how I met Miranda, so you understand the pattern. 6 years earlier, Curtis had been the success story everyone in his construction program pointed to. By 32, he'd built his project management firm from nothing, winning contracts for commercial developments across 3 states. He was visiting a site in Carmel, an affluent suburb north of Indianapolis, when he literally ran into Miranda Moss at a coffee shop. She'd been rushing out. He'd been rushing in. Her latte ended up on his shirt. She was beautiful, blonde, polished, with the kind of easy confidence that came from growing up wealthy. She insisted on buying him a new coffee, then another, then dinner. She listened intently as he talked about Brandon, about building his business, about his plans. She seemed fascinated by his work ethic, by how he'd pulled himself up from growing up in foster care to running a successful company. "I was the project," Curtis said bitterly. "I just didn't know it yet." The Moss family had old money, the kind that came from 3 generations of careful investments and strategic marriages. Josephine and Douglas Moss lived in a 7-bedroom house in the most exclusive neighborhood in Carmel. Their son Garrett worked at the family investment firm, managing other people's money without ever really working a day in his life. When Curtis met them, they were polite but cool. He sensed their disapproval. He wasn't their kind. But Miranda had insisted she loved him, and within a year, they were married. He'd even signed a prenup to make them comfortable, though he'd had far more assets than Miranda did at the time. "The prenup," Neil interrupted. "Do you have a copy?" "In my safe deposit box." "What?" "Because if they were planning to have you committed, they'd need to circumvent it. Under that prenup, if you divorced, you'd keep your business and assets. But if you were declared incompetent and a conservatorship was established," Neil's eyes widened. "The family member assigned as conservator would control everything, And the prenup wouldn't apply because it's not a divorce. It's a medical guardianship situation. Curtis felt sick. Miranda was going to be my conservator. Unless, Neil said slowly, pulling out another document, she could make the case that she wasn't suitable because of emotional strain and recommend her mother instead. Look, here's a draft of a letter to that effect. She was going to play the grief-stricken wife who couldn't handle the burden. The room fell silent except for the hum of the heating unit. Brandon spoke up quietly. Dad, when are they coming back? Curtis checked his phone. Their flight back from Rome is on Sunday evening. They land at JFK at 9 p.m., then a connecting flight home Monday morning. Neil started gathering the documents. Curtis, we need to go to the police. Tonight. No. Curtis's voice was cold. Not yet. What do you mean, not yet? This is evidence of serious crimes. Curtis looked at his attorney, his expression unreadable. Because if we go to the police now, they'll get arrested when they land, spend a few nights in jail, and their expensive lawyers will get them out. They'll claim the documents are fake, or taken out of context, or that they were just exploring options during a difficult time. With their connections, they might get reduced charges or plea deals. So what do you want to do? I want them to feel what they try to do to me. I want them trapped. I want them to understand what it's like when everything you thought was secure collapses around you. Curtis pulled out his laptop. And I want Brandon to be safe and provided for, no matter what happens. That's the priority. Neil hesitated. Curtis, as your attorney, I have to advise against any plan that involves breaking the law. I'm not going to break the law, Curtis said. I'm going to use it. Every single regulation, every loophole, every statute they thought protected them. I'm going to turn it against them. He opened his laptop and started typing. I spent 18 months in Houston dealing with federal regulations, customs issues, international contractors, and bureaucratic nightmares. I learned a lot about how the system works. And here's what the Moss family didn't count on. I'm smarter than them, I work harder than them, and I'm motivated by something they'll never understand, protecting my son. Brandon smiled for the first time that evening. Are we going to win, Dad? Curtis ruffled his son's hair. We're going to do better than win. We're going to make sure they never hurt anyone else again. Neil sighed, pulling out a legal pad. Okay, tell me what you need. Curtis's smile was cold. First, I need you to file for an emergency custody order preventing anyone from removing Brandon from my care. Then I need you to freeze our joint accounts. Not just pause them, legally freeze them with a court order based on suspected fraud. I also need you to contact the IRS. The IRS. Curtis pulled up another document on his laptop, one he'd found buried in the email attachments. Because Josephine and Douglas have been claiming my business expenses as deductions on their investment firm's taxes. They've been running money through my company without my knowledge, using it as a shell. That's tax fraud. And the IRS? They don't care how wealthy you are. They don't care about your connections. They care about their money. Neil started writing faster. What else? Tomorrow morning, I'm going to make some calls to people I've worked with in Houston. Then I'm going to need you to prepare a lawsuit, not just for the fraud, but for attempted kidnapping of a minor, emotional distress, and violation of the prenup agreement. Make it massive. And here's the key part. We file it at exactly 8 a.m. on Monday morning. Why that specific time? Because their connecting flight lands at 7:30 Monday morning. They'll be in the airport when their accounts are frozen, when the IRS puts a hold on Douglas's business accounts, and when they try to use their credit cards to get a car home. Everything will be declined. They'll be stranded in an airport with no access to money, facing federal investigations and incoming lawsuits. Neil looked up from his notes. You want them to feel helpless. I want them to feel exactly what they tried to do to my son. Curtis glanced at Brandon, who was fighting sleep. I want them to know what it's like to have nowhere to go, no one to help them, and no understanding of why their perfect plan fell apart. Brandon yawned. Dad, when this is over, can we get a dog? The tension broke. Curtis laughed, the first genuine laugh he'd felt in hours. Yeah, kiddo, we can get a dog. A big one. As Neil packed up to start working on the legal documents, Curtis made Brandon brush his teeth and get ready for bed. He tucked his son into the hotel bed, something he hadn't done in a while since Brandon had insisted he was too old for tucking in. Dad, Brandon said drowsily. I was really scared when they left me outside. But I'm not scared anymore. Curtis felt his throat tighten. Why not? Because you came home. You always come home. After Brandon fell asleep, Curtis sat at the desk with his laptop, working through the night. He sent carefully worded emails to contacts at the Department of Labor, the Indiana Attorney General's office, and the Better Business Bureau. He documented everything, backed up files, and built a timeline of events. Around 3 a.m., he received an email from Marcus Lawrence, the private investigator. Curtis, you need to see this. Calling you in the morning. Curtis called him immediately. I'm awake. What did you find? Marcus's voice was grim. Your wife Miranda has been having an affair. Guy named Enrique Branch, a business consultant who's actually unemployed and living off girlfriends. They've been meeting at hotels for 6 months. But that's not the worst part. Tell me, Branch has a record. Fraud, identity theft, served 2 years. Got out 18 months ago. I think your wife and her family were planning to use him as a fall guy somehow. There are texts between him and Miranda about taking care of the Brandon problem. Curtis's blood ran cold. Define taking care of. They're vague, but combined with those emails about the boarding school, Curtis, I think they were going to claim you were abusive toward Brandon. Branch was going to pose as a concerned witness, maybe even stage something. Once you were committed and declared unfit, they could rewrite the narrative however they wanted. Curtis closed his eyes, forcing himself to stay calm. Can you testify to this? I can provide documentation. And Curtis? Branch was on that flight to Italy with them. I've got him on the passenger manifest under a booking made by Josephine Moss. They took him along. Why would they bring him? Insurance, maybe? Or, Marcus paused. Your wife's planning to divorce you. With you supposedly mentally incompetent and Brandon in boarding school, she'd be free to marry Branch, and they'd have your money to start fresh. Curtis thanked Marcus and hung up. He added this information to his growing file. The scope of the betrayal was stunning, not just cruel, but calculated. They'd thought of everything, or so they believed. He looked at Brandon sleeping peacefully, this child they'd wanted to erase from their perfect picture. And he thought about all the foster homes he'd grown up in, all the times people had treated him as disposable, as less than. He'd spent his life building something stable, something safe. And these people had tried to take it from him for no reason other than greed and cruelty. Curtis opened a new document and began writing. Not a legal filing, but a timeline. A plan. By the time the sun rose over Indianapolis, he had mapped out every move for the next 72 hours. Neil arrived at 7 with coffee and breakfast sandwiches. He looked exhausted. The emergency custody order is filed. Judge will see it this morning. The account freeze will take until this afternoon, but it'll be in place by Monday for sure. I've got a friend at the IRS who's very interested in the information you provided. Good. Curtis woke Brandon gently. Kiddo, we're going to spend the day doing something fun. What do you want to do? Brandon rubbed his eyes. Really? But aren't you dealing with all the grown-up stuff? The grown-up stuff is handled for now. Today, I want to spend time with you. Tomorrow is Thanksgiving, and we're going to celebrate properly. They spent the day at the Children's Museum, then caught a movie, then had burgers at Brandon's favorite restaurant. Curtis kept his phone on, monitoring developments, but he focused on his son. He took photos, bought Brandon a stuffed wolf at the museum gift shop, and listened to him talk about school and his friends and the science project he was working on. That evening, back at the hotel, Neil called with news. The judge granted the emergency custody order. Brandon is legally protected. No one can remove him from your care without a court order, and given the evidence, that's not happening. Also, the IRS is opening an investigation into the Moss family investment firm. They're fast-tracking it given the evidence of active fraud. Timeline. Monday morning, they'll freeze Douglas Moss's business accounts pending investigation. It'll be one of the first things processed since we flagged it as urgent. Curtis smiled. Perfect. Friday passed with similar normalcy. Curtis and Brandon volunteered at a soup kitchen for Thanksgiving morning, helping serve meals. Brandon seemed lighter, happier than Curtis had seen him in months. They returned to the hotel for a modest Thanksgiving dinner Curtis had ordered from a local restaurant. Turkey, stuffing, all the traditional items. This is better than the fancy dinners at Grandma Josephine's house, Brandon said, mouth full of mashed potatoes. Those were always weird. Everyone acted like they were in a movie or something. Curtis understood exactly what he meant. Every meal with the Moss family had been a performance. Everything perfectly plated and precisely timed. There was no warmth, just obligation and appearances. On Saturday, Marcus sent over a complete report. The evidence was damning. Texts, photos of Miranda and Enrique together, financial records showing cash payment from Josephine to the fake psychiatrist, documentation of the shell company scheme. Curtis organized it all, adding it to the growing file he'd present in court. Sunday evening, Curtis and Brandon were sitting in the hotel room when Curtis's phone buzzed with a flight tracking alert. The Rome to JFK flight was on time, landing at 8:47 p.m. Eastern. He imagined them in their first-class seats, Miranda probably wearing expensive Italian clothing she'd bought with money stolen from their joint account. Josephine holding court about their wonderful trip, Garrett and Douglas discussing which restaurants they'd visited. He wondered if they'd thought about Brandon at all, if they'd felt even a moment of guilt for leaving a child outside in November. He suspected they hadn't. "Dad, what happens tomorrow?" Brandon asked. Curtis considered how much to tell him. "Tomorrow, some people are going to face consequences for their choices. But you don't need to worry about any of it. You're safe, I promise. I know. I trust you." Those simple words meant more to Curtis than any contract he'd ever won, any building he'd ever completed. He'd spent his whole life earning trust, proving himself, and his son trusted him completely. Monday morning arrived cold and clear. Curtis was up at 5 a.m., confirming everything was in place. Neil texted at 6, all filings submitted. Federal freeze on Moss accounts active as of 5:47 a.m. Your lawsuit hits the system at 8 a.m. IRS has their accounts flagged. It's done. Curtis replied, "Thank you." At 7:32 a.m., the plane landed at JFK. Curtis imagined them collecting their luggage. Enrique Branch probably carrying Josephine's expensive bags. Everyone exhausted from travel, but satisfied with their cruel plan. At 7:45 a.m., they would head to the airport lounge, trying to get coffee and breakfast before their connecting flight. That's when Miranda would try her credit card and find it declined. Then Josephine would try hers, declined. Douglas would pull out his card, declined. Confusion would set in. They'd call their bank, only to be told their accounts were frozen pending federal investigation. At 8 a.m., the lawsuit would appear in the court system, public record. Their names attached to accusations of fraud, conspiracy, attempted kidnapping. At 8:15 a.m., Douglas's business partners would start calling, having been alerted by the IRS that the firm's accounts were frozen. Questions would be asked. Panic would spread. By 8:30 a.m., they'd understand that something catastrophic had happened. But they'd be stuck in JFK with no money, no credit, no way to rent a car, or even buy a train ticket home. Curtis's phone rang at 8:47 a.m. Miranda. He let go to voicemail. She called again. And again. Then Josephine called. Then Garrett. Curtis blocked all of them. At 9:15 a.m., Neil called. "Curtis, your wife's attorney just called me. She's frantic. They're stranded at JFK. She wants to know what's happening. Tell her attorney to read the lawsuit. Every word of it. She's claiming this is a misunderstanding, that the documents can be explained. Tell her attorney that's what court is for. We'll see her there." The calls continued throughout the day, but Curtis ignored them all. He and Brandon spent the morning at the library, then had lunch at a diner. Around 2 p.m., Neil called with an update. "You're not going to believe this. Enrique Branch tried to use a credit card in Miranda's name at the airport. Fraud alert. Port Authority police detained him. When they ran his name, outstanding warrant for missed parole check-ins. He's in custody." Curtis allowed himself a small smile. Good. Miranda is apparently hysterical. The family is trying to get a flight on someone else's credit card. But with the lawsuit filed and the federal investigation public, their friends are suddenly unavailable. They're stuck in New York with nowhere to go. Have they tried to contact Brandon? Miranda's attorney asked if she could speak to him. "I told him absolutely not without court approval, which given the emergency custody order, won't happen." Curtis, they're starting to understand how bad this is. Miranda's attorney mentioned a settlement discussion. "No settlements. This goes to court. I want everything on the record. By evening, the news had spread through Indianapolis's business community. Douglas Moss's investment firm was under federal investigation. The family was facing a massive lawsuit. Rumors swirled about fraud, conspiracy, child abandonment. Curtis's phone buzzed constantly with calls from former acquaintances, people from Miranda's social circle, business contacts. He ignored them all except for one, his foreman at the Houston project, calling to offer support. Tuesday morning, the local news picked up the story. Prominent Indianapolis investment firm under federal investigation. The Moss family name, so carefully cultivated for generations, was now associated with scandal. Neil called at 9 a.m. They're back in Indianapolis. They managed to get a flight late last night using Garrett's emergency credit card that wasn't linked to the frozen accounts. But Curtis, you need to hear this. They went to their house, and the police were waiting. What? Enrique Branch, trying to make a deal, told police about the plan to harm Brandon. Claim you were abusive, stage evidence. The police wanted to question them immediately. They're at the station now. Curtis felt a surge of grim satisfaction. And Miranda is denying everything. Josephine is refusing to speak without her attorney. Douglas is trying to use his connections, but nobody's taking his calls. Garrett is claiming he didn't know about any of it, which the emails prove is a lie. What about Brandon? Are they trying to use him? The detective handling the case wants to interview Brandon, but only with you present, and only to verify he was locked out of the house. It's standard procedure. Are you comfortable with that? Curtis looked at Brandon, who was doing homework at the hotel desk. Let me talk to him. He explained the situation carefully, making sure Brandon understood he hadn't done anything wrong, that this was just so the police could document what had happened. Brandon nodded seriously. I can do that, Dad. I want to help. The interview at the police station was brief. A kind detective asked Brandon simple questions about being locked out, about how long he'd been in the car, whether he'd had food and water. Brandon answered honestly, his voice steady. The detective's face grew darker with each answer. Son, you're very brave, the detective told Brandon, and you're not in any trouble. The people who left you outside, they're the ones in trouble. After they left the station, Curtis received a call from an unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Mr. Marquez? This is Christina Tompkins from the Indiana Attorney General's office. I'm calling about the case against the Moss family. We've reviewed the evidence provided by your attorney and the IRS. This is significantly larger than a family dispute. What do you mean? The shell company scheme they were running through your business? It's connected to at least 4 other businesses we've been investigating for money laundering. The Moss investment firm appears to have been operating a sophisticated fraud network for years. Your case broke it open. Curtis sat down heavily. How many people did they hurt? We're still investigating, but potentially dozens of clients whose money was mishandled or stolen. Mr. Marquez, we'd like to work with you on building the criminal case. Your cooperation could ensure they face significant prison time. Whatever you need, Curtis said immediately. I want them to pay for all of it, not just what they did to Brandon and me. Over the next week, the scope of the Moss family's crimes became clear. Douglas had been running a Ponzi-like scheme for years, using new client money to pay returns to older clients while siphoning millions for personal use. Josephine had been the mastermind, using her social connections to recruit wealthy victims. Garrett had helped falsify documents. Curtis's legitimate business had been used to launder some of this money, making him an unwitting accomplice until now. The realization made him sick, but also made him even more determined to see justice done. The custody hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Miranda's attorney tried to paint her as a confused woman who'd been led astray by her family, but the evidence was overwhelming. The emails, the texts with Enrique Branch, the money transfers, all of it showed calculated cruelty. Curtis sat in the courtroom with Brandon beside him, holding his son's hand as witness after witness testified. Mrs. Patterson, the neighbor, described finding Brandon shivering in the car. The detective read from his interview notes. Neil presented the documents from Josephine's bag, each one more damning than the last. When it was Miranda's turn to testify, she tried to cry, to explain that she'd been under pressure from her family, that she'd never meant to hurt Brandon. But under cross-examination, her story fell apart. The prosecutor brought up Enrique Branch, the affair, the plans they'd made together. Mrs. Marquez, did you or did you not write this email to your mother? The prosecutor held up a printout. Brandon needs to disappear from our lives. Curtis is too attached. We need to remove both obstacles. Miranda's face crumpled. I was upset. I didn't mean it literally. You didn't mean it? Then why did you leave a 12-year-old child locked outside for 3 days with no shelter, no supervision, no food or water beyond what kind neighbors provided? Miranda had no answer. The judge, an older woman named Vivian Johns, looked at Miranda with open disgust. I've presided over many difficult cases, Mrs. Marquez, but rarely have I seen such calculated cruelty toward a child who, by all accounts, was innocent and loving. You didn't just betray your husband. You abandoned a helpless child to potentially freeze or starve while you vacationed in Italy. The judge awarded Curtis full custody of Brandon with no visitation rights for Miranda unless supervised and approved by a court-appointed psychologist. She also granted a restraining order preventing any member of the Moss family from contacting Brandon. But the legal victory was just the beginning. Over the next 3 months, the criminal cases progressed. Douglas Moss was indicted on 47 counts of fraud and money laundering. Josephine faced conspiracy charges and fraud. Garrett was charged as an accessory. Miranda faced charges of child endangerment, conspiracy to commit fraud, and attempted kidnapping. Enrique Branch, facing his own charges for fraud and parole violation, testified against them in exchange for a reduced sentence. His testimony painted a picture of a family that saw other people as tools, as obstacles, as things to be used and discarded. The trial became a media sensation. The wealthy family brought low by their own cruelty. The father who fought back to protect his son. Curtis tried to shield Brandon from most of it, but some things couldn't be avoided. One evening, Brandon asked, "Dad, why do they hate me so much? I try to be good. I try to make them like me." Curtis knelt down, looking his son in the eyes. "Brandon, listen to me very carefully. Their hatred had nothing to do with you. You are perfect exactly as you are. Some people are broken inside, and no amount of goodness from others can fix them. They saw you as competition for money and attention, and that made them cruel. But that's their sickness, not your failure. I know, but it still hurt. I know it did, and I'm sorry I didn't see what was happening sooner. I was working so much, traveling so much, I missed the signs. That's on me." Brandon hugged him. "You came home when I needed you. That's what matters." The criminal trials lasted months, but the verdicts were inevitable given the evidence. Douglas Moss was sentenced to 22 years in federal prison. Josephine received 18 years. Garrett got 12 years. Miranda was sentenced to 8 years for child endangerment and conspiracy charges. On the day Miranda was sentenced, Curtis took Brandon to the courthouse. Not to gloat, but so Brandon could see that justice existed, that people who did wrong face consequences. As Miranda was led away in handcuffs, she looked at Curtis with something that might have been regret or might have been rage. Curtis felt nothing but relief that she'd never hurt Brandon again. Outside the courthouse, reporters clustered around them. Curtis had avoided media until now, but he decided to make one statement. "My son Brandon was treated as disposable by people who should have protected him. They locked him outside in November, hoping to erase him from their lives so they could steal what I'd built. But Brandon found evidence that revealed their true nature, and because of his courage, justice is being served today." The message here isn't about revenge. It's about protecting children. It's about standing up to people who think wealth and connections put them above the law. And it's about never, ever giving up on the people you love. Brandon squeezed his hand, and Curtis saw his son standing taller, stronger than before. The civil lawsuit settled months later. Curtis was awarded $4.7 million in damages, money they'd stolen, plus punitive damages for emotional distress and the harm to Brandon. The Moss family's assets were seized to pay victims of their fraud scheme, with Curtis receiving priority as a proven victim. But the money wasn't what mattered most. What mattered was the day Curtis and Brandon moved into their new house, a modest but comfortable place in a good school district with a big backyard. "Dad, can we get that dog now?" Brandon asked, running through the empty rooms. Curtis laughed. "Yeah, kiddo. Let's go to the shelter this weekend." They adopted a German Shepherd mix named Ranger, who'd been abandoned at a fire station. Ranger and Brandon bonded immediately, both of them survivors who'd found their way home. Curtis rebuilt his business reputation, making it clear he'd been an unwitting victim of the Moss family scheme. Most of his clients stood by him, and new ones came. He hired a full-time office manager so he could travel less, be home more for Brandon. Life settled into a new rhythm. School pickups, homework help, soccer practices, weekend hikes with Ranger. Curtis dated occasionally, but wasn't in a rush. Brandon was healing, making friends, laughing more easily. One evening, almost a year after that Thanksgiving, Brandon was doing homework at the kitchen table while Curtis made dinner. Out of nowhere, Brandon said, "Dad, I'm glad it happened." Curtis looked up, surprised. "What?" "The whole thing. I mean, it was terrible when it was happening. But we're better now than we were before. It's just us, and that's good. We know who we can trust." Curtis sat down across from him. "You're right. We came out stronger. And we help people now." Brandon was referring to the foundation Curtis had started with part of the settlement money, helping children in foster care and protecting them from abusive situations. "We do. You helped me choose the name, remember?" Brandon smiled. "The Brandon Project. Still can't believe you named it after me. You're the one who started it all. You found that evidence. You were brave when I needed you to be brave. This is all because of you, kiddo." Brandon went back to his homework, but Curtis could see the smile on his face. His son was thriving, no longer carrying the weight of trying to win over people who couldn't be won. He was just being himself, and that was more than enough. That night, after Brandon went to bed, Curtis sat on the back porch with Ranger at his feet. He thought about the envelope, about how close he'd come to losing everything. How close Brandon had come to being sent away to some boarding school prison where they'd try to break his spirit. He thought about Miranda and her family, now scattered in different federal prisons, their wealth and reputation destroyed. He didn't take pleasure in their suffering. He was too focused on the life he was building to spend energy on them. But he did feel satisfied knowing they could never hurt another child the way they tried to hurt Brandon. His phone buzzed. A text from Neil. Just saw the news. 3 more victims of the Moss fraud scheme got their settlement money. That makes 24 families compensated. "Curtis, you helped save a lot of lives by coming forward." Curtis replied, "Just did what needed doing." But as he looked at his house, at the light in Brandon's bedroom window, where his son was probably reading past bedtime, he knew it was more than that. He'd fought for something that mattered. He'd protected his child. He'd turned a moment of betrayal into an opportunity for justice. And in the end, that's all any father could hope to do. Inside, Ranger barked softly, wanting to come out. Curtis led him into the yard, watching the dog explore the fence line. In a few weeks, they were planning a camping trip, just the 3 of them, Curtis, Brandon, and Ranger. No one to judge them, no one to hurt them, just family. The past was behind them. The people who tried to destroy them were paying for their crimes. And the future stretched out ahead, full of possibility. Curtis smiled, called Ranger back inside, and locked the door. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new moments to build on. But tonight, everyone he loved was safe under his roof, and that was all that mattered. He'd come home for Thanksgiving and found his son sleeping in a car. But he'd also found the evidence that would set them free. And in the end, they'd found something even more valuable. They'd found themselves stronger and better than before. The Moss family had tried to make Brandon disappear. Instead, they'd disappeared themselves, victims of their own cruelty. And Curtis and Brandon, they were just getting started. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.